to our third InFocus session of this Rotary year. Our theme is community and economic development, and the particular focus for this evening is Rotary helping young people on their career journey. We are very fortunate this evening to have as our speaker Chris Davies. Chris is a curriculum consultant. He works in further education and in sixth form colleges, and in particular, his passion is enabling young people to access vocational support and information through a work link mentoring scheme. He's been facilitating this for over 7 years with a network of mentors. It's predominantly one-to-one mentoring with young people aged 16 to 24, and it helps them to develop themselves and their career awareness. So he has pioneered this work, and we are so lucky to have him with us this evening. Do share these sessions. They're all recorded. You can access them on YouTube, and I'm sure your clubs and your community groups would love to hear and be able to pick up the ideas that Chris will share with you this evening. So it's my real pleasure to introduce your speaker for this evening. Do put questions into the Q&A throughout the session, and we will get them answered for you at the end. So if Chris, it's over to you, and thank you so much for being our inspirational speaker for this evening.
Good evening, and I hope that you can hear me. I'm guessing you can. I'm not receiving any messages to say the contrary. So thank you very much for the opportunity to help young people by letting you know how this particular project evolved and why it evolved, and also how it impacted on the young people that I was fortunate enough to be able to help during the process, and of course the good that it did for Rotary, and particularly the individuals who were involved as mentors themselves. So without further ado, I will share the screen and start the formal presentation. So with a bit of luck, you can see that now. What actually happened was I've been working in further education, say, for a long time, over 30 years, and still am. And one thing that was very, very clear to me was that in further education, which is for predominantly 16 to 19-year-olds, although there are adults in there, lots of adults doing evening classes and part-time courses and so on, and HE, there were around, at the time, 900,000 16 to 18-year-olds in colleges, and there's about twice as many as are in maintained schools and sixth forms. So it's a huge number of people, and the support they were getting for their careers choices was not as I would have liked, or in fact any careers officer I've ever met. The resourcing is such that it just doesn't work very well. So typically a careers officer will have about 1,000 young people to look after. Now that's the same whether you're in school or a college, a sixth form college or an FE college. They're being slightly different. And you can imagine that one careers officer looking after 1,000 people, it doesn't go very far. And then I looked at the Rotarians in our club and the district and wider, nationally and internationally. I thought, well, we've got all this expertise there of people who are leaders in their field, who have all this experience, and as their age profile increased, I thought, well, even more so. You know, we have a massive experience, and where is that vocational experience going? And I thought, well, I know we can help these young people. So that's how it started. And obviously I had to look at all the existing schemes and then work out exactly how this might work best for young people and Rotarians without knocking out the usual activities of mock interviewing and so on. So this is what I came up with. It was originally a community interest company. I now run it just as a process, method, and ideal. And the mantra, a helping hand from those in the know, is what I've used for the last 7 years. We've helped about 600 young people, I suppose, over that period. And that's been done with a relatively small number of mentors, about 70 to 80. During that time, it's increased as we've gone on. So that's what it's called. I tried to define the term as something new. So although mentoring is not new, and WorkLink is being used by other people, the WorkLink mentor that I derived, I was trying to start something that was quite radically different, because it was just targeted at 16, or predominantly at 16 to 19, up to 24 occasionally, but mostly 16 to 19, when most people make their mistakes. And you'll all remember from your school days, I guess, and I'm sure there are people here, and I'm one of those as well, who made decisions at that time to choose my A-levels, or to choose my BTEC, or to take a particular career at a undergraduate level, and then realize it's the wrong one, and then drop out. And of course, these days, you've got a £10,000 debt, or perhaps more, from dropping out of uni, perhaps in your first year. And if you get on the wrong A-levels, that can affect what the college or university you can get into, and so on, so on, so on. So during these formative years, these young people really benefit from a little bit of guidance, even though they don't necessarily want to listen, as you will know, being teenagers. So we'll come back to that. So let's go down a slide. There we are. So that's what a WorkLink mentor is: an experienced practitioner in the area of work a young person aspires to. And this can be quite broad. So sometimes you'll get somebody saying, I want to be somebody who polishes brass handles, and you'll find somebody who's been polishing brass handles their whole life, and you'll match them up, but it's not very usual. Usually you'll get somebody wanting to be a lawyer, and then you have to decide whether that person wants to be a barrister, a judge, an article clerk, or solicitor, and so on. So you try to make the best fit possible, and that's part of the process. So a young person, and I have to say, particularly Indian and Chinese young people, in my experience in FE at least, very often say, I want to go into medicine or law. And there are those two fields. And part of the mentoring process is to realize their potential, or let them know that actually this is not perhaps the career for you, because you're not in that right place at the moment, and your qualifications are not going to make the grade, and so on. The other main component of WorkLink mentoring is it is almost entirely remote. So there is very little, in fact, generally no face-to-face contact. So during COVID, of course, it was perfect as a medium for keeping young people engaged, or helping them as part of that package of support. And of course, you can do it absolutely anywhere. And I'll come back to that. So that's what WorkLink mentoring is in essence. And I just wanted to reassure you, so it's not a replacement for these particular components. So usually when I've talked to Rotary clubs, the first thing they say is, well, we already do that. And I have to unpick that and unpack that and say, well, actually, what you're doing is great, but this is different. So it isn't instead of mock interviewing. It's not instead of talking to groups of students. All these go alongside, of course, as very worthwhile activities. And nor is it something that is akin to work experience or visiting an employer, which are quite different components of a similar package. So it is not that, and therefore, it's worth, perhaps, I hope you'll agree, looking at. And the other thing that happens is Rotarians say to me, I haven't worked for, many of them retired very early, so I haven't worked for X years, 30 years or something, and I can't remember anything about what I did anyway, or all my practices are out of date, or my work contacts are now very, very small, or very low, very few. And my answer to that is, whilst you may be out of touch in terms of those particulars, your experience and your knowledge is still far more than a 16-year-old who knows nothing about their particular chosen field. And before I launched this, I took a survey of 260, I think it was, young people across 5 different colleges, and 74% of them didn't know somebody doing the job that they wanted to do, which makes perfect sense. It's quite different in schools. I would say, and also in private schools particularly, because what happens there is, you know, when you go in at 11, the parents get involved and often stay till the end of schooling. So if the young person does their level 3, their A levels or equivalent, leaves at 18, parents will be involved and get to know each other over a 7-year period. And usually the school has very good relationships with those parents. Those parents volunteer, sit on the school board and so on, and the PTA, and they will cover this kind of thing. In further education, the learners don't arrive till they're 16, they generally leave at 18, and no such relationship exists. Partly because it's only 2 years, partly because, of course, teenagers are teenagers. And at that point, we're kind of washing our hands slightly of them and saying, go float in the world. Not entirely, but there is an attitude. They're also quite difficult to handle, of course. So they need that help, though, even though they may not ask for it. And that's why I focused on this particular age bracket. So what do we do? Well, there's a whole range of things here, as you might expect, and it very much depends on who you're talking to, when in the cycle of education you talk to them, whether it's the beginning of their A levels or level 3 or the end of it, and whether they've had issues and the reason for them coming into this scheme, which I'll perhaps talk about later if I remember, try to. So providing guidance and insights into a specific industry, that's very straightforward for most Rotarians. And they often talk about their career journey. So what happened to me when I was young, I went through this and that stage, and I got an internship, or I had work experience down the road, or whatever it happens to be. So that helps to pan a possible path for a young person to emulate. Being a critical friend is absolutely critical for the young person. So parents won't always challenge, and that relationship is quite difficult through those teenage years. And if both parents are working, the conversation time is limited even further. The teenager might well be out and about far more, well, they're likely to be, aren't they? So having somebody else involved who is not the teacher, who is not their very far-stretched careers officer, and not the parent, can make it very valuable to them. So all of these things have been done by work-linked mentors at various times with various mentees. Personal statements are particularly useful. So when they get to 17, they're preparing for their applications through UCAS, and they write these things, which are usually appalling, and they send them off. They have help, of course, from their tutors, but it helps enormously also, particularly for the tutors will look at it once, maybe twice if you're lucky, but that's all, because I've done that many times myself. So if you can give it an extra pair of eyes and suggest certain corrections, many of it's just simple grammar or self-absorption or the wrong tense, nouns, that kind of thing, you can really make a difference to their chances of becoming getting their first choice or something of that nature. The rest is fairly self-explanatory there. The motivation of the young person is again dependent on you a little bit and your personal skills, and listening, of course, is a great skill in itself. And in January, after Christmas, that's when a lot of people drop out of further education. They've gone through the first term, it's miserable weather, they've gone back after Christmas, and that's a peak time for talking to them. Also, just before exams, of course, another peak time when they find it very stressful, and they just need reminding that it's normal and don't worry, and so on and so on. So that's one list of what work-linked mentors do. And then case studies from the workplace. Here's a project. Could you do that for me as part of your coursework? That's not uncommon. We've had that with engineering, particularly in architects and so on. So could you design a garden? We've had for a landscape architecture course. Now the mock interviews are, again, that's very useful because more and more of those are taking part online. So although going to the school is a great, or the college is a great thing to do, they will have to get used to remote interviews. We don't want people to travel unnecessarily, of course, that's my environment hat on. So mock interviews online and improving interview technique, it can be very, very helpful to them. And in fact, we've recorded YouTube videos of 2 or 3 of these mock interviews, which I will let Cheryl and Phil have to make available to you in the same place as the form which I'll talk about at the end. So the other part, and this is really important, I think, and you'll recognize this, of course. So your networks are great, and Rotary networks were absolutely amazing when you were all working, I'm sure, and many of you still are, perhaps. But they were exemplary, and people in FE don't necessarily have that, not available to them, and certainly private schools have amazing networks, and some of you will know that, of course, as well. So this is great if you can do it. I had a retired optician as a mentee, and he'd been out for about 25 years. So he said, I can't do anything, but he was a recognized name in the town. So he contacted another optician and just said, I used to work at such and such. I used to own this, and they knew him. And he said, I've got a young person who wants some experience. Could you help? And lo and behold, the door opened. So never give up. There's always a link in there still somewhere. If you get to know them well enough, then a reference, again, we've had this happen a few times, not all the time, but fairly regularly. So if at the end of the period of mentoring, and normally it's about 6 months, that's what we say. And at that point, both parties are expected to end it. However, what frequently happens is, because you've created a psychosocial relationship, it carries on, and that makes it, that can, in fact, many mentees are still in contact 7 years after beginning the relationship, because you've helped them in their life journey, and they value that, of course. So I think that's something, it's a good feeling for the mentor, I think, to have that as a young person, a mini me, if you like, who's going somewhere because of your influence. Lots of young people need a golden seed, as it's called, that inspirational person who makes them change direction or makes them reconsider. And sometimes you don't realize who it was until well after the event. I think Muhammad Ali took up boxing because his local police constable trained him, and Lance Armstrong became a cyclist because his mother made him cycle to school, I think. And Richard Branson was another one who had a mother who said, go and look after the newsletter at school, and so he did, and the rest is history and so on. So that golden seed, that person who makes a difference, you'll all remember it, and most of you remember a teacher, I suppose, but why not a work-linked mentor? So there we are. Access to useful learning materials, again, that's just an add-on there, but certainly I remember we had a GP and a wannabe medical student, and the anatomy, he was an anatomy lecturer, so he had his learning materials from HE, but he was able to give those to the A-level student to help him pass, and he did, and now he's a doctor, and so on and so on. Not just because of that, of course, but as part of the service and the process. So that's what a work-linked mentor does. Just before I talk about this much, you may have heard of the Gatsby benchmarks. So quite recently, the government decided under the Gatsby Foundation that there was a need for better guidance for young people because of all the things we've been talking about, their mistakes and so on. So they came up with these 8 benchmarks, and in there are 3 which this meets or helps to meet. So personal guidance is one of them, encounters with employers and employees, and addressing the needs of each student. So 3 of the 8 Gatsby benchmarks are met, and these are quite recent. You'll see we mentioned 2020 in that article. So there is now a compunction for colleges and schools to abide by these benchmarks, and that means this has a greater role. You'll see articles everywhere about the benefits of mentoring, and this is Matthew Syed, who you might have come across, a well-known columnist, but he came through some tough times, and he's talking there about how charismatic mentors can really make a difference, but any mentor can if they do a reasonable job. And it's better to be reasonable than not do it at all. So just because you may not be charismatic, I'm sure you all are, but if you weren't and you were worried about that, and your age and your lack of recent experience, you are still a figure of seniority to most young people, and that can help. Cosmetic maturity, I call it. And there we are. That's a quote from that article from Matthew Syed. So how often is opportunity denied to youngsters from poorer backgrounds, not because of a lack of ability, but a dearth of meaningful connections? That's from that article. That stuck with me as being particularly pertinent. So at one point, about 3 years ago, I thought, well, this is great. You know, this every young person should have a work link mentor between 16 and 24. That's what I thought. I thought it made perfect sense. We have 2.3 million 16 to 18-year-olds to start off with, for example. We have many adults. We have 1.4 million Rotarians, I believe, now, instead of 1.2, which is good news. So why doesn't each Rotarian look after a young person somewhere? And of course, the beauty of remote mentoring is that bias is largely removed. So when you're talking to a young person, you're not judging them necessarily. And if they don't want to have their camera on, which is sometimes the case, you are talking to somebody and you're not judging them on anything whatsoever except how they sound. We give mentees the option of choosing gender if they prefer a male or female mentor. We've developed that kind of refinement. And sometimes, particularly with Asian communities, they prefer same-sex mentoring. So we give that as you know, we try to help the mentees relax. But it's a great way of doing it. You can also do it, of course, internationally. So we've had mentors in Australia and students in England and so on, and America. And that way, you know, you build an international relationship. And if it goes anywhere, who knows? You might get free accommodation if you're on your student gap year and you want to drop in and see them. It all depends on how it goes. I will mention at this point just safeguarding, because some of you will already be thinking it, I suspect, and you're quite right to think like that. So how did that work? Well, many Rotarians are very, very unwilling to talk to young people one-to-one through the internet when they don't know them, quite understandably. So we put in place several safeguards to make sure that anxiety could be removed. Firstly, I set this up as a community interest company originally, so I removed the responsibility from the Rotary clubs. That was the first thing I did. I took some insurance out. So that was another thing I did, which you had to do anyway, of course. And then we started to get better and better at it. So if you contact a young person 3 times or less per month, then the DBS check is not necessary. That's written into legislation. So by ensuring that there is no contact for more than 3 times per month, it is not covered by the legislation. That doesn't mean that we don't look after safeguarding. It means that you are below the threshold where it's likely to go wrong in any way. It never has. We've never had any issue whatsoever with anybody, of course, largely because Rotarians, you know, can be relied on and are trustworthy, and most mentors are Rotarians, not all of them. If that's not enough, and for some it's not, what we also have done is to ensure that the school is on board or the college is on board, and that personal tutor is copied in on every single email that you send and invited to any Zoom meeting that you might, or Teams meeting that you might engage in. So by offering the tutor the opportunity, then of course you are saying, you know, this is an open book, come and also the young person is requested to copy the tutor in to every email that they send. And just doing it is usually enough to ensure that, you know, the exchanges are above board and useful and functional. On top of that, we also get each young person to sign an agreement, and the same with each mentor, which just we give them some guidelines for working on the internet, and how to behave, if you like, and that takes care of again of more of those issues. And if that's not enough and there's still some doubt, the more cautious colleges write home on behalf of the young person to the parents to say, your young person is being put forward for a mentoring scheme. Sometimes it's given as a reward to people, just for a handful of people, for example, if they're exceptionally high flying or something of that sort, and get the parents to agree. So whatever it takes, quite frankly, and that way there isn't an issue. Now, since then, the company was dissolved. That was because I got fed up filling the corporation tax return in and because I wasn't making any money on purpose. It was a community interest company set up with a district grant, and we're still running, but just with the processes. And the insurance is covered by Rotary, because we're not putting anybody in danger because of all of those safecomings. So that's that part. Anyway, back to the slides. So I've gone off piste slightly. So that paragraph at the bottom was from Gillian Keegan, and I'd like to think it was personally written to me, because I ramped up the pressure that I could put on to get every young person a work link mentor in the country. I just thought this is something that everybody should have, and we've got a lot of young people. And look at David Cameron's big community, what I think he called it. This seemed to me to be just part of that. And Rotarians, service above self, vocational service, I thought this is great. So I wrote to my MP, I then met with my MP. My MP then banged it up the scales, the ladders, to, at that point, Gillian Keegan, and I put the case to her that mentoring is a benefit to young people for all these very good reasons, and I got that back. So it didn't get any further than that, unfortunately. I tried to lobby Ofsted, and you'll see mentoring is mentioned in the Ofsted inspection documents, but because staffing is so minimal at the moment in colleges, there is not much spare capacity to do anything other than that is measured by Ofsted. So you'll find that that's generally the case, except in private education. The funding in further education is about 4,500 per student. In a private school, on average, if you strip out the capital, it's about 8,000. So almost double. And that's, as I said, after capital payments. So it's not a level playing field, but this helps to level off some of that. At least that's the idea. So it didn't get any further than that, but I raised the profile, and it continues. So some examples. So what can you expect? Well, here are a few wonderful ones. So the first one there, this was Sammy. So I made the names up slightly. Well, actually, that's not true. That was called Sammy. But her email address, and here's somebody wanted to go to Queen Mary's to study law, and she was using Princess Sammy 36 at. So, the first thing you start off with is, well, you think that's really going to be, are you going to be taken seriously? Even though she was might have been very pretty. I don't know. I never met her. But I mean, you've got to be very careful when you use that kind of email address, just as in first impressions, at least. The next one, there we go. So 16 wanted to be a doctor with 4 grade C and 3 grade D GCSEs. And nobody had told this 16-year-old that isn't anywhere near, you need straight A's, of course, at a standard chance, but nobody had told them. So at this point, the mentor was able to say, well, maybe this isn't for you right now. That doesn't mean eventually they won't make it, but having your head on and thinking that's what I'm going to do with that kind of profile is not perhaps best use of that person's time. And this was another one. That's one of the ones I remember taking on as if he wanted to be a civil engineer. He didn't know one, and we found a civil engineer in Rotary, paired them up, and he was extremely happy. He wrote many times to me saying how wonderful his mentor had been, and is very respectful. And you get that kind of real buzz from that gratitude that comes out of that. So I like that enormously. And then and this was somebody, yes, actually she wanted to be a journalist. I remember this lady, and we had somebody locally who was an editor, and he took on this young lady, gave her lots of advice, took her portfolio to various papers and so on, and they're still in contact, and she got a job. So that was another really good one. And this one was, so this one was no contact with engineers, but we had 2 work matters for this one. So one of them was the apprenticeship manager at Rolls-Royce, and another one was a professor at Oxford Brookes. Again, he was just, these are contacts and friends of contacts, and then ended up studying manufacturing engineering at Loughborough, and has since left. So these are just typical kind of case studies, which I think you'll agree are worthwhile knowing about. So I've been through those. I'll just get rid of those. There we go. So then there's this chap. He's crying there. I'm not surprised, really. Is at Woolston. So he was a single parent. He was studying at Hackney College, B6 College in Hackney, and he had no GCSE in maths, grade C, so he couldn't do A-levels in a normal school. They wouldn't let him in, so he ended up at this college. The principal there at the time was a ardent Marxist, but apart from that, he was Pembroke College educated, and he had created downstairs this beautiful Victorian library with Egyptian mummy in it, all sorts of old paraphernalia, and created this very deep learning environment for those who he felt could benefit from that kind of thing. So Mohammed, I was working at the college at the time, and I mentored this guy, and he took psychology, sociology, not maths, but he took humanities essentially. I can't remember the third one, but he achieved grade A levels. And in psychology, you have to have a C in maths, or sometimes a B to be able to do it because of the stats and so on in it. And he ended up, and he was on free school meals, single parent. And since then, he worked, he got another qualification from Cambridge. He went to Oxford, then Cambridge, I think, or the other way around. And now he has a following of several 100,000 young people, and helps those in disadvantaged minorities to progress. But it's a great story. I still keep in touch with him occasionally via LinkedIn. But what a great success. And he helps other people, mentors other young people now to go through the same process. So that's Mohammed, Ibrahim Mohammed. We'll call him Mo for short. So for Rotarians, then, what does it do? Just to remind ourselves, well, it contributes to our vocational skill base, and I know there's a big push on that. Rotarians using their vocational skill base, your skills and experience, and of course, here we are today, community and economic development. It's a great benefit to young people, as I hope you'll agree from what I've said. It opens up opportunities through the international dyads. A dyad is a pairing, a socioeconomic pairing. So it's a dyad. So international dyads. It can be conducted anywhere. And I hadn't mentioned this, but it really takes more than 2 hours in total. And it builds on our lockdown generated IT skills. I guess many of us couldn't use Zoom beforehand, but of course now we can. Okay, so almost done. So the goals for this as a scheme, as I think I've mentioned, are there for you to see. To start it up, you just need to know somebody in your local college or school. Now, this is always a problem. I have been embedded in, I've worked in 27 colleges, I think it is now, in the last 30 years. And when I go there, I can sell this in. It's quite easy because I'm there. But that's because I'm there. If I wasn't there, it would be much harder, of course. So if you were to go to your local college, you would want to talk to your careers officer in the first place. What you'll tend to find is they'll see it as a bit of a threat, because their job is that's their job. So you may not get anywhere. So once you've informed the careers officer that you're going to do it, you really want to go straight to the principal, and then the principal will devolve it down to probably the head of student support, or director of student support, or VP sometimes, and that's the person who will be able to help push it through. And what they'll do is try it out probably on a group of students, usually science students. Science students are very keen for this sort of thing. Access students love it, of course. They're the people who are going for degrees who haven't got the A levels, so they come late in life. They benefit from mentors, and they're more mature. Yes, so that's really it. And Rotary is a source of mentors. Why not keep it that way? Finally, there, I think then, just to let you know, so all of the paperwork attached to this, the whole shebang, is at that location. I know this presentation will be made available to anybody that wants it. So if you go into there, you will find the forms, the agreements, the guidance for working on the internet. And if that's not enough, then I have lots of other paperwork that you can use. You're welcome to use WorkLink Mentors as a logo to describe what you're doing. any of the material are not remotely precious. I don't have any copyrights on anything. It's not an issue. I own the logo, so that's fine too. So that's, I think, is it. So I hope that you've got something from this. I hope one or two of you, because it takes effort, one or two of you might take this away and at least embed it into your thinking in terms of something you could do, and suggest that your club might want to involve itself in, if only for a short period of time, in a more formal way, over on top of the informal ways that I know you do. That's it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that, Chris. We have had a few questions, and if I could just remind everybody that if they have any questions they want to ask, if you type those into the quick Q&A section. I just see another one's gone in there just now as I'm talking, so that that's how we'll pick them up. If I could start off with the first question. You did mention some aspects of safeguarding. And the question is coming, are there any different requirements in Scotland because their laws are different?
Good question. The answer is we didn't have any in Scotland. I've only ever worked in England, even with our mentors. There haven't been any Scottish, because again, our sources of mentees have all been English colleges. So I don't know, but I will certainly, well, as usual, if anybody wants me, I will find out, but I don't know that. I don't know. No.
Okay, if you can find that out, if you let myself or Cheryl know, and then we can pass that on to the guy who raised the question.
Yeah.
And sort of aligned to that as well, there's also been a question about GDPR. How does that come into it? How do you manage GDPR?
That's relatively straightforward. So the students at every institution have a work email. They fill in a form which goes to somebody in Rotary who is DBS checked, which only has on it, and this is, again, it's very minimal. So all that you need is their name and their email. That's all that we get given, and that's their college email. So that's it, and no more information is shared, nor is it asked for. We know the tutor, obviously, for the student. So with those 3 bits of information, there's no danger of anything else happening. We make it very clear to students they're not to give out any details to their mentors. But again, because of all the other safeguards in place, as in, you know, copying the tutor and having the tutor there and so on, it's never been an issue. There's always a small risk, but then there is in everything that you do with young people anywhere. But that shouldn't stop you trying, I don't think.
Okay, that's good. A question that's just occurred to me when you mentioned that you're quite happy for, and you don't, no, you've got no copyright or anything like that on, or licenses with regard to using the logo. So does that mean that anybody can pick it up and they wouldn't necessarily have all the other requirements that you have?
So work link mentoring is a term I've tried to evolve as a new term. It's like trying to own the term mentoring. You know, nobody owns the term mentoring. So, which is why I've said, you know, work link mentors are the people. Work link mentoring is the process. So it isn't something that is branded as such. The logo, you're right, has a bridge on it, and people might use that and say, well, who owns that? And of course, they'd find nothing because the company doesn't exist anymore. So yeah, so I guess you'd have to watch that a little bit, but on the whole, the term itself you can use, and the paperwork you can use. Yeah, I think there is a bit of worry there, isn't there? I guess if it got into the wrong hands. Yes.
Okay. I think you touched on this, but it might be useful just to enlarge a little bit. If I want to do this, how do I start?
So the way to start is, first of all, to just talk to your club. That's what I did, and just say, well, you know, I've got this idea. There are lots of young people here who need our help, and I would turn to one of our Rotarians and say, you know, John, we've got a medical student, for example, we've got 3, and that started off because it's only 2 hours over the 6-month period, and nobody has taken more than that because there's only 3 contacts every month, so it's very minimal. So you're not asking very much. And if a Rotarian says, I'm not prepared to put in 2 hours for vocational service in a 6-month period to help a young person who's asking for help, then I question whether the values are quite in the right place. I know there's lots of other this is the big area, this is the big problem, there's lots of other pressures on our time, but that's how it started off. So I got the mentees. I came back and said we need this. When I couldn't get them locally, then I went to district. So district, I just put a list. I needed horologists, for example. I didn't know any horologists, so I sent out, so the district secretary sent out a list of needs. You know, we got these particular needs. I needed about 10 opticians at one point, optometrists and so on. So that went out as another request to the district, and I got responses from quite a few clubs, which was really satisfying. And then I just paired them up with a process. So I sent an email to the mentor to say, this is your mentee. And all I say about the mentee is they are first year A-level student studying at this institution. If they give me their full name, I'll use their name. Here's their email address. Here's the tutor address. And I copy in the tutor to that. And then do the same with the student. So I send the student an email to say, this is your mentor, copy in the tutor, and off they go. It's a very, very easy process. And then at the end, as I say, I write to both and just say 6 months is up, hope you enjoyed it. You know, any feedback, very welcome, that kind of thing. But usually it fizzles off. There are an awful lot of them that don't reply. I was going to mention that. So an awful lot of young people, you know, get this email, their parents have set it up or their teachers set it up, and they do the teenage thing and they don't respond, or they just respond unwillingly because the tutor has had a good go at them. And then you're stuck with this difficulty. But in actual fact, if you have sent a polite email to the student and they have not responded, and then I say, well, wait 3 weeks, do it again, and then do it again. If after a couple of times you've got no response, I just say to the tutor, that the mentor, write to the tutor, and the tutor will have a word with that student, and hopefully the tutor will say, this is not acceptable, this is not adult behavior, this is not how you treat somebody who's trying to help you. And the mentee will learn that way, if nothing else. Yeah.
Okay. So sounds like the very, very first step is actually to make contact with the educational establishment to see whether they will actually support you or invite you in.
I guess if I was doing it cold and not with the insight that I've got, it would be better perhaps to find out the Rotarians in your club that have skills that they're prepared to offer as a mentor service, then write to the school and just say, you know, we have 2 lawyers, we have somebody had a lorry driving business, we had a baker, you know, we have all of these people who are willing to be mentors. Do you have any young people that might benefit from having an e-mentoring relationship? I think that's probably a better way around, because they'll immediately think, we'll send that to this particular place. That's what I would think.
And another point that was been raised, just come through there, is the tutors. Are they happy for you? Have you getting involved, or do you think they think you're treading on their toes?
So the tutors in FE, they get an hour, between 3/4, in fact, between half an hour a week with their tutees. The tutor gets about half an hour a week if they're at level 3 second years. If they're level 1 students at 16, they can get up to an hour and a half. In that hour and a half per week, they will have 28 students, roughly, maybe in a class, 24 perhaps. They will have to do the register. They'll have a whole program of things to deliver. That's, you know, the environment will get an hour per year if it's lucky, for example. So this will be an extra part of that. But because it meets the Gatsby benchmarks, there's usually buy-in because it's a local, and if you're doing it for local college or local school, then your other tendrils will come to work. So you'll end up doing interviews and visits and talking to a group of people who want to go into accountancy, whatever it happens to be. So so yes, there we are. That's an answer.
And someone was asked, how will I know I've been a successful mentor? What feedback do you get?
So there are some which are amazing students. It tends to be that well, the most of the ones I can remember are non-white British, actually, the ones that have been extremely grateful for this. Not entirely. So you get the gratitude from you know, directly from their thanks, particularly for those doing A-levels in the professions. They tend to be on the whole a little bit more polite. I set up about 50 or 60 motor vehicle students with a whole range of automotive experts across Worcester and so on at one point. And in that one, I was amazed how grateful some of them were. And we got a few writing, you know, thanks for that. That was really useful. Lots of them got placements out of it. Many didn't respond at all, though. And the tutors would say, you know, they'd write to me and say, oh, sorry, the mentor would write to me and say, look, I've tried to contact this student. I get no response. So I did what I just said to you before. I said, send another one. And if they get that message and their tutor has a word with them, then at least they've learned that next time this happens to them, when there might be more at stake for an interview, for example, you know, that they don't blow it. So every experience is worthwhile. And even if they don't contact you, somebody outside their home and their school network cares enough to try. And I think that's a message in itself. And it doesn't take very long, does it, to write an email that's not responded to? So.
I certainly can resonate with that one. We used to do, in my club, we used to do some interviews. Then the educational authority and or the school, not quite sure, decided they were going to do it a different way. But we would have the same sort of situation would crop up. We'd be told we were going to come and do mock interviews for 5, and only 4 would turn up. And then the question was, we didn't have to deal with it, the school dealt with it. And quite often, a couple of weeks later, we'd be asked again to go in and see the one that didn't come in, and they'd had the same comments that you've just described there. So that's how that be. It's not a question, but I think it's worth actually repeating this one. Douglas Kerr has written, "Hi Chris, I'm a member of the Plymouth Rotary Club in Plymouth, Plimpton Rotary Club in Plymouth. I'm about to embark on this journey with a local YMCA. Just completed the STEM ambassador induction to become a volunteer ambassador. It's 4 hours in 12 months. After I see how it goes, then I'll take it to my club." Are you aware of the YMCA ambassador program?
Not the YMCA one. I've heard of STEM ambassadors. There have been lots of schemes for STEM ambassadors. And I said it's mostly the STEM subjects that want mentors, actually, because they're usually very vocational careers that they embark on, whereas humanities on the whole are not. So that sounds great. I mean, there are lots of these things. Prince Charles has a similar thing with the Prince's Trust, and Tower Hamlets College has its own wonderful mentoring system, which I helped with when I was there, linked to the financial services industry just across the river there, and so on. So you know, and many colleges will do it for themselves. So Worcester, I was talking about earlier, I was there. They asked for about 2,000 at the time, and I couldn't get them all done when I was there. But when I left, what they did was they did it themselves. So they just took the idea and they called it something else, and they've advertised on LinkedIn and on their webpage, and they've had their own mentoring scheme. So I think the STEM ambassador scheme, it sounds fantastic, and that's exactly the right sort of thing to go through. You know, some sort of structured approach, but you can create it yourself. But yeah, that's marvelous. Great.
Brilliant. Well, that's the end of all the questions we've had. So if I could just say thank you very much for your time. You've been an excellent presenter for us. It's been enlightening and informative, and there must be opportunities for Rotarians and for Rotary clubs to replicate what you've been doing. I'm guessing that you would be probably quite happy to point them in the right direction if they want to get in touch with you.
Yeah,
and have a bit more clarity.
Yeah, with pleasure. And the specific details of the forms and so on, and various other documents that lie behind it. I'm happy to share anything.
Okay. Yeah. So that's really good. So I think we might be just a little bit early. There's another question coming. Let's not waste them. Oh no, someone's saying thank you. Douglas Kerr was just saying thank you for the comments you had on his point on that. So thank you very much, Chris. We'll now move on and start advertising our next event in a month's time. But if you could, oh, you've done it. That's excellent on there. Right. Thank you for all the people that's joined in today and listened to the talk. In 4 weeks' time, on the 9th of November, we'll have our next InFocus. November is the Rotary Foundation month, and we will have the past RI President and now Rotary Foundation Trustee, Holger Knack, as our speaker. Holger will be talking about the importance of personal giving to our one and only charity, the Rotary Foundation. I hope that you will be able to attend and that you will spread the word to your club members and onto their friends. So look forward to seeing you all in 4 weeks' time.